The US has its fair share of issues when it comes to illicit flower, but in other places around the world, this plant grows in the wild, a potential infrastructure proliferated by Mother Nature. My father was actually born and raised in Kampala, Uganda in the 1950s and 1960s, and he would tell me stories about how this plant would grow in the wild throughout the country, and that they actually used to feed the cows flour because it grew in such abundance. And this is the case for a number of different countries in Africa. Yet in America, we always think of places like Colombia in terms of hotspots for illicit market imports. That's probably because during the golden era of smuggling in the 70s, up to 70% of all illicit flower that entered the US came from that one country alone, and that of Colombia. But when we pan out to the global illicit market, there is a clear leader located in Africa. To put this into perspective, according to the United Nations Office of Substance and Crime, in 2004, 99% of all flower consumed in Ireland was actually grown in South Africa. Meanwhile, South Africa is only ranked third out of all of Africa's illicit flower producers. But who's number one? Welcome to another episode in the Trap Tree series, which is a sub-series of the High Design History series. And in this episode, we're going to explore Africa's global activity throughout its various regions and how it became the global leader in illicit flower exports. Please make sure to hit the like button, share this, subscribe, comment down below, and follow me on all the social medias. You can also join our Discord, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. All those links are going to be down below in the description. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. Still, there are countries on the west side of Africa, like Ghana and Nigeria, that are seeing illicit imports. In 2014, Ghana was the #1 consumer of flower in the world. Nigeria, Africa's most populated nation, has more recently risen into the top 3. Flower is obviously illegal in both countries, but high population numbers demanding illicit product is a formula for an extremely lucrative and high illicit market activity, especially when it comes to importing. We are definitely seeing shipments being sent into Western African countries from American continental markets. The overproduction in the legal markets spill into both local and global black and gray markets. This actually opens up the potential for future legal markets. You'll already find fake packs with branding from companies that operate outside of these countries being propagated in these regions. Sometimes these are illicit market individuals who are looking to up the price of their local grown flower. Other times it's actually companies coming into the market looking to build their infrastructure ahead of time by collaborating with local growers and stamping them with their branding to start gaining recognition and loyalty in that specific region or area of the world. However, it's looking like this would be mainly the exporting rather than importing. Now, before we go on, I just want to thank our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at getseedsrighthere.com by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds at getseedsrighthere.com. Make sure to use my code LMC10. Now let's jump back into the video. So by the end of 2023, the legal market in Africa is expected to expand past $7 billion of the total $350 billion global market. It's been a slow start, but a new style of legalization has entered the market that could expose Africa to direct exploitation from foreign markets. In 2021, Rwanda followed the same path as Uganda, where both countries legalized the cultivation of medical flower only for the purpose of exporting. With only exporting and no internal sales or use allowed, this created a formula to continue to criminalize its own population while allowing foreign companies to enter into business with most of the labor done by the same citizens you would criminalize for that same business. Uganda gave out its first license in 2012. This went to an Israeli company, Together Pharma, who partnered with the Ugandan firm Industrial Hemp. This highlights two things. One, the Ugandan people aren't the ones who are benefiting from this. It's only the firms or corporations that are well established that are able to afford these licenses in the first place. I've seen med licensing in Africa ranging between $30,000 and $50,000, already well outside of the range of Ugandan farmer and agricultural workers. But to start growing and exporting out of Uganda, you're looking at $5 million for capital with a bank guarantee of $1 million. And this creates an incentive to partner with a foreign entity that is established in the market, such as Israel, who is in one of the global leaders in the plant's research. Now, two, even if the firm or corporation is Ugandan, it's in their best interest to partner with foreign entities in the situation of export-only trade. Doing so ensures that you consistently have your marketing, distribution, and infrastructure that you need to do business on a large scale. Meanwhile, your company simply provides the labor for cultivation and processing. Now, Africa's history with foreigners and flower goes back for centuries. The mid-12th century is when it's believed that the Arab traders were the ones who first introduced the plant to Africa after it had migrated from its origins in Asia. By the 15th century, the plant was spread as an indigenous Bantu nation migrated into South and Central Africa. By the mid-19th century, flower, or Dagga, as it became more commonly known as, was fully embraced by white Dutch settlers who found its purpose for medicine and recreation. In the end of the 19th century brought in the British Empire, who were looking for cheap or free labor to expand their global colonization. And after World War I, they began importing slaves from India, who were smuggling their own phenotypes, mainly consisting of smaller, bushier plants that were easier to conceal, leading to what became known as indica. Now, these plants didn't originate from India. That's just what Jean-Baptiste Lamarck called them, thinking that they were from there. But slap a Latin name on it to make it sound scientific, and voila, you have your new classification that has nothing to do with its true history. And this would only be the beginning of the foreign influence on the plant in Africa. Many of the Dutch settlers were also tobacco smokers, and before then, Africans consumed their Dagga mostly by drinking or eating. Now, however, it didn't take long for the Dutch to spread their tobacco smoking combustion method instead. I won't argue what's better, but we can all agree that the way you consume can alter its effects. So they essentially had changed the way the culture interacted with the plant. However, nothing would change this interaction more than when the British started seeing any workers that use the plant as lazy, insolent, and likely to go insane and slow down the entire workforce. Sounds familiar, right? Meanwhile, the warriors of the Zulu nation in South Africa were widely known to use the plant to enhance their ability to fight and counter mental stress before entering battle. Authorities were having discussions relating directly to race and the plant. With the Indians, they were rapidly approaching the same numbers as the British colonists in the 1900s. There was fear of violence or uprising from their indentured workers, and meanwhile, more and more of the white population was becoming more urbanized with African culture, and the plant was at the root of the bridge. In 1925, Indian hemp was added to the list of dangerous substances by the Advisory Committee Council of the League of Nations, and this was done by requests submitted by lawmakers in South Africa. And South Africa has a deep-rooted history of, obviously, racism. Institutionalized racial segregation, apartheid, continued for decades in the 90s. During this time, committees were put together to analyze the racial groups and their interactions with the plant. The report of the Interdepartmental Committee of the Abuse of Dagga in 1952 gave law enforcement the power to seize homes, vehicles, and property with presumed guilt. In 1971, the Abuse of Dependence Producing Substances and Rehabilitation Act categorized the plant as Schedule 1, meaning it was an undesirable, dangerous, and dependence-producing hallucinogen with no medical benefits. This is obviously being influenced heavily by the United States, right? And by 1992, though, right, no scientific study could be done with the plant. However, with legalization, South Africa has become Africa's largest medical flower market, bringing in over $500 million, with many Western and European companies looking to outsource their cultivation here. Located near the Tropic of Capricorn, South Africa provides a rich cultivation climate enticing for foreigners. What's worse is that the problem with Ugandan's legalization is actually occurring with South Africa, even though their citizens are legally allowed to grow and consume flower. And for one, the South African government has been described as an octopus with many arms that don't really communicate with each other. And this leads to lawmakers making opposing policies and decisions at the different stages and levels of government and enforcement. So your local police station might be following different rules than the one next to the city or the next region over. Especially because the laws are incredibly vague and unclear. For example, you're allowed to grow and consume, but there's no specific mention of exactly how many plants you can have or how much weight or the potency. It's just a generic rule that allows any law enforcement to say you have over the limit based on their own personal opinion. You're lucky to get any paperwork whatsoever, as there typically isn't even a court appearance. And even if you somehow can afford to take legal action, the court typically throws the case out, and this absolutely tarnished the future of the legal market here. And how can the people trust their government after they legalize a plant that they continue to arrest them for? Very conflicting, right? And this doesn't just slow down the consumption, but also the production of the legal market, with less people wanting to take the financial risk to invest in a business that could get shut down tomorrow. Because of this, the ones who don't play by the rules continue to survive. This area has land that is too promising to pass up for some farmers, especially in areas like the infamous Swaziland in Eswatini. The landlocked country between South Africa and Mozambique, this is the home of Swazi gold, a rare sativa phenotype with no CBD. This highlights the importance of IP in the flower market with Africa's plants. However, foreign companies like Stellenbosch are using tissue culture technology to extract and send these genetics to Europe and the Middle East, Switzerland, and Israel in particular. The advantage of tissue culture compared to seeds or even cloning is that you can multiply the plant without pathogens, viruses, or infectious diseases, right? You kind of repair the genetics, right? So in a sense, these plants could possibly be even better than what you would find in Africa by the time they are cultivated by foreign entities. Meanwhile, because the plant is still illicit in this region, law enforcement has been raining poison from helicopters onto the farmers' crops. This doesn't just affect illicit plants, this affects all of agriculture. Many of the illicit farmers are generational, literally paying for their clothes, food, and education to survive. What's even more curious, because of the propaganda against the plant, hardly any of the growers are actually consumers. Foreign influence is clear when we see that most of the population is Roman Catholic or Protestant Christians. But with police literally poisoning their land, these people are turning to criminal activity beyond growing flower to make ends meet. The result's been an increase in overall crime and poverty. The natural resources in this area have nearly been exhausted, and Eswatini is on the verge of economic collapse. But out of all the countries in the world, the largest producer of illicit flower is located across the Mediterranean Sea from Spain, which is Morocco. Its location alone plays a major role. It's just off the Tropic of Cancer with an ideal climate for production in its proximity to Europe. The Middle East and direct access to Americans via the Atlantic Ocean makes it an international flower hub. 40% of the workforce is in agriculture, being the world's leading producer in olives and almonds as well. Similar to actually California with almonds. Now, Morocco is also the world's largest hashish producer, providing Europe with 70% of its product. To put into perspective how much flower Morocco produces, we know that Moldova in Europe is the second largest, and Morocco produces 3 times more flower than Moldova. Most of the flower is grown in the Riff Mountain region, where the land is most fertile. Originally, the Riff tribes were allowed to grow flower, but in 1956, with the independence of Morocco, the plant became prohibited. During the 60s and 70s, Western tourism brought an increased demand for flower. So the local tribes began expanding from small personal grows into full-scale farms that produces more illicit flower than any cartel. Still, not everyone wants to grow or even can grow, which is why current legislation in Africa typically discriminates against its citizens. For example, the Hayes Club in South Africa was a private club that allowed people to collectively grow and consume together. However, the courts decided the definition of private actually means that the person who cultivated the plant is the only person that can consume it. However, this creates an unconstitutional absurdity which denies any paraplegic or people incapable of farming for themselves to have access to the plant. These are typically the people who need it most. Now, before we go on with the story, I just want to mention one more time again. Thank you to our friends over at getseedsrighthere.com. Get 10% off your entire order at getseedsrighthere.com and support the show by using my code LMC10 at checkout. Get high quality clones and seeds to get at getseedsrighthere.com. Now, let's jump back into the video. So, the future of Africa's flower market has high potential to either transform the continent into a world leader in the legal market that creates generational wealth for their communities, or repeat the history of exploitation of the people and culture for foreign benefit. To be fair, it makes sense to partner with foreign companies that can provide the infrastructure that companies in Africa might not be able to afford or have expertise in, but at the same time, it would be great to see an African company or companies develop into the providers for African infrastructure instead. It would also be great to see a higher level of inclusion for the legacy farmers. It's estimated there are close to 1 million of these farmers, and flower advocacy groups are demanding more African brands by Africans. Some good news in 2023 is that there are now incubation programs being developed for small, medium, and macro entities in Africa. And there are currently around 20 companies going through the process, which should help them with licensing and global networking to get started. Programs like these can either push these companies to work more directly with their communities or to collaborate more with foreign markets and brands. Hopefully, Africa is able to find a balance between the two. Now, if you skew too hard, only working with your community, then you eliminate the global market potential and vice versa. Perhaps one of the best possible solutions would actually be the cousin to flower hemp. Africa possibly has the biggest potential to dominate the global hemp production market, and hemp is an ideal plant that can be grown all across Africa. Like I said, it definitely grows wild there in certain areas. And since only about 13.2% of Africa's population consumes flower, it would make sense to start producing something that they actually would use themselves. In fact, new technology could lead to, hemp oil replacing plastic. If that were to happen, any country committed to its production is almost guaranteed to see the boost in their economy. And this wouldn't be in any competition with any illicit or gray markets. You wouldn't have police poisoning your fields, and you would have multiple industries to tap into with the variety of textiles and products that can be derived from hemp. However, in order to do this, we'll need to see countries in Africa raise their, THC tolerance levels up to 1% instead of the 0.02%, which eliminates even hemp from being produced. At 1%, Africa can begin cultivating and manufacturing hemp, but only time will tell. See how this all turns out down the road. Now, comment your opinions down below. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't by now, and check out our full Trap Tree series playlist next. And anyways, please make sure to hit the like button. Like I said, join the socials, join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all the other platforms. The links are down below in the description. Big shouts out to all the folks watching from any country in Africa. I can't wait to visit some of those countries in the great continent of Africa very soon. And if you're watching from any of those countries in Africa, don't hesitate to tap in with your boy. Hit me via email or DM. Anyways, this is LMC, signing out.